Bible stories with details that you might have passed over. Today's episode, we're going over the Exodus. The year that Moses was born, the Pharaoh decided that he wanted to unalive all of the boys that were born that year. So the mother of Moses, fearing for the life of her son, in sheer desperation and possible stupidity, put her son into a basket, put him onto a river, and he flowed downstream. Absolutely miraculously, the Pharaoh's daughter was walking down by the river downstream from where the mother of Moses dropped off her baby. She saw the baby floating in a basket, unable to have kids herself. She jumped at the opportunity and was like, "This is mine, this is my baby." But then the baby was still at the age that he needed to breastfeed. So she went looking through all the Jewish slaves and said, "Hey, is there anyone here who's able to wet nurse?" Then the mother of Moses was like, "I am." And so the mother of Moses ended up raising her own son as if she was the nanny of the baby, while the Pharaoh's daughter was considered the mother of Moses. Time passes, Moses is basically raised up in Egyptian royalty. Years pass and he's going through one of these slave camps and he sees an Egyptian guard mercilessly beating a Jewish slave. So he goes to his defense and he ends up unaliving that Egyptian soldier. And no, morally that was completely and totally fine. That was a good thing. He defended the life of another person from an evil person. That is okay. He did not commit murder as a lot of people claim he did. Someone found out about that, so Moses fled so that he wouldn't get in trouble legally with that. He comes across this woman, he ends up marrying her, has some kids with her. While he's out on this mountain, he sees a bush that is on fire, somehow on fire without actually taking any damage to the bush itself. So approaching that bush, he hears this disembodied voice talking to him that tells him to take off his shoes because the ground on which he's standing is holy. Obviously, that terrifies Moses, but then he starts talking to this voice, and this voice is saying that he is the God of Jacob. He's the God of Israel, and he wants all the Jews set free from slavery. He tells Moses that you're going to be the one who does it. So Moses is like saying like, "Hey, I don't like talking to people. I'm bad with my mouth. Can you please have someone else do it for me?" So God was like, "You have a brother. His name is Aaron. He is going to talk for you." But then Moses, still needing to convince Aaron and needing to convince everyone else, he asks God, "Hey, well, whenever I go and tell them, who should I say sent me? Like, what is your name? Who shall I say to the sons of Israel has sent me to set them free?" And God says, "Tell them that I am has sent you." God's name, Yahweh, is a verb, and it means to be, or I am. So Moses does as he's commanded, and he goes, and him and Aaron go to talk to the Pharaoh and say, "Hey, you need to let my people go." The Pharaoh says, "No." So they start doing some signs to prove that God is real, like he turns his staff into a snake. But then the demon worshippers, these witches, they're able to perform a similar magic trick where they're able to actually turn their staffs into snakes. But Moses' snake eats the other snakes, and then whenever Moses grabbed that snake, it turned back into a staff. They couldn't duplicate that, but that was still not enough to convince the Pharaoh. So the Pharaoh, in refusing to let the people go, God needed to show that he is the only God. He needed to show that all the other gods were fake. So God sent the 10 plagues. The 10 plagues were specifically done to target certain gods. The first plague was targeting an Egyptian demon god called Hapi. It's Hapi. And this was the god of the Nile. So the very first plague was to turn the Nile into blood, showing that it was no longer this life-bringing source of water. It was now poisonous to drink. It was now blood. To show that, hey, that god's not real. It has no actual power. The second god was this goddess called Heket that was personified as a frog. So like you've seen Anubis having the body of a man and the head of a dog or a wolf or something like that. Well, this one was a woman's body with the head of a frog. So second plague, God sent frogs. And this was like an immense amount of frogs. Like you've heard like the thing about raining frogs. This is that. The third one was a god called Geb. Now, Geb was a god of the earth. It's a demon god. These are all false gods, but it was a god of the earth. And so as a result of all these frogs coming around, they all died. All these gnats, these lice came. These primarily came from the dust, showing that God had dominion over the thing that Geb was supposed to have dominion of. And of course, with all these insects and bugs, they carried diseases that eventually infected the livestock, which is plague number 4, death of the livestock. Now for that one, the demon god that Yahweh was targeting to show that he's not real was called Hathor. And Hathor was always symbolized and personified as a cow or a bull, which is why God killed all of the livestock, all of their cattle, all of the stuff that they used for food. God killed all those. Following that, plague number 6 was boils. So like nasty leprosy boils. There was a demon goddess called Sekhmet, and she was the goddess of like medicine and healing and stuff like that. So God made them all break out with these nasty boils and just showing that they were not healthy and that God couldn't keep them healthy. Following that, God sent this plague of hail. Like imagine the worst hailstorm possible. That was this one, like very destructive, violent hail. And that was to target 2 different gods. One that claimed to be the god of the sky called Nut, and also a demon god called Set, who was kind of like the one who had power over like storms, lightning, stuff like that. So as they would pray to this demon to make it stop, it didn't stop. It just kept hailing and hailing and hailing, showing that they had no power. Plague number 8 was locusts. Now these locusts came and they destroyed absolutely everything. They went through just crushing their crops, the amount of food. And the reason why is because there's a demon god that you've probably heard of called Osiris, who is actually the god of agriculture, showing he had no power, no control, and he could actually not keep any of his crops safe. Then plague number 9 was darkness, where literally imagine nighttime during the day for several days. Like that is terrifying, but the god that they worshipped as the sun, they called him Ra, and God shut off the sun essentially. Obviously, the sun didn't actually go away. I don't know how it happened. I don't know how any of these happened, but they did happen. And then finally, we have the death of the firstborn. Now, the reason I had to come to this was because every single thing that God did, Moses went and talked to the Pharaoh and said, hey, this is my God doing this. He said, if you let my people go, we'll stop. And then the Pharaoh said, please, we'll let you go. Just make it stop. Moses makes it stop. Pharaoh says, never mind. He did that every single time. So finally, the god that needed to be taken down was the Pharaoh himself, because the people worshipped the Pharaoh as a god. They thought that the Pharaoh was the son of Ra and Isis. And Isis being Ishtar, that is the demon goddess of snip, snip, raise a boy as a girl, snip, snip, that evil demon. But Pharaoh's job was specifically to protect children. That is, he was the god that could protect the children. And so this plague was going to come through and it was going to kill the firstborn of every family throughout the entire land of Egypt. So God told his people, hey, what you're going to do is you're going to take a lamb. It has to be without blemish. You cannot have a single bone broken in its body. It has to be in its prime, so it has to be 1 year old. You are to kill it at twilight. Whenever you kill it, you are to take its blood, put it on the sides and top of the door frame. Now, if you look at that, sides of the door frame, top of it, the top is going to drip down, so it's going to make what symbol? A cross, because that lamb is the representation of Jesus. It is the foreshadow of Jesus. That's why John the Baptist said, behold the Lamb of God. Jesus is that lamb without blemish, that not a bone was broken in his body, just like this lamb. Everything, it's so cool. But then this tattoo right here, Exodus 12:23, God says that any of the houses that have the blood on the sides of the doors and at the top of the doors, I will not permit my angel of death to go into your house and strike you down. And so all of the Jews obeyed God. They all did that. So that night when the angel of death came through, the angel of death passed over. That's where we get the term Passover. He passed over all of the Jewish houses that had the blood, which means that all the Egyptian families were struck by this plague, which killed the firstborn of every family, regardless of age. So finally, because of this, the Pharaoh says, okay, just go, get out, leave. So all of the Jews make their exodus. They make their exit. They all leave. That freed the slaves from the Egyptian tyranny. But then the Pharaoh got furious and he thought, we're going to go chase them down. So then they went chasing them. That's where we have the scene at the Red Sea, where Moses parts the Red Sea so that all of the Jews could cross on dry land. But then whenever the Egyptians finally caught up, they caught up at the Red Sea and God drowned all of the Egyptian soldiers. Now, one of the coolest things I need to add to this story is the fact that we have archaeological evidence for this. Now, hear me out on this. The Pharaoh at the time of Moses, his name was Amenhotep II. Now, his firstborn son died, and his second-born son became the next Pharaoh. He left behind a document explaining that he became Pharaoh because his brother died on the night of death, when all the firstborn died. That is extra biblical evidence from 1500 BC talking about the same exact event. He became Pharaoh next exclusively because his older brother, the firstborn, died the same night that all of the other firstborn died. That is terrifying. But that is just more and more evidence that the Bible is actually historically accurate. It is true. Thank you. God bless.